Hello and welcome to this video lecture. I'm Dr. Kuban, and today we're going to be discussing business level strategies. Now, one thing we need to differentiate is the difference between a business level strategy and a corporate level strategy. A firm in a single market or industry is going to employ a business level strategy to sell the product in that market. A diversified firm in multiple markets or industries will employ a business level strategy in each of those markets. It will then have a corporate strategy that deals with the diversity of product, industries, and geographic locations to take advantage or mitigate issues with that diversity. Now, customers are key when we think about business level strategy. A firm should examine the who, what, and how. Who are the customers that we're trying to serve? What are the needs that the firm is seeking to satisfy in those customers? And how can the firm use its core competencies to satisfy the needs of those customers better than its rivals? Now, there's two fundamental ways that you can gain an advantage over your rivals. The first is differentiation. The second is having a low-cost advantage. When you are differentiating, you are finding some way that the product is different, i.e. better in the mind of the customer, that they are willing to pay some additional price for that difference. And then that hopefully offsets the costs of creating that difference. On the low-cost side, you are producing an essentially equivalent product at a lower cost. Now, of course, it can't be as simple as just having two strategies. So there's actually 5 different strategies that we'll look at. Now, the difference between two of these is basically how focused is your market. If you're broadly focused or narrowly focused, the broad is going to be a cost, leadership, and differentiation that we just talked about, while the narrow focused is called focused cost leadership or focused differentiation. And then we have the trying to do everything right in the middle that is called integrated cost leadership and differentiation. This is a hybrid strategy. So the cost leadership strategy, a firm is looking to produce no-frills standardized products for typical customers. The offers of these low-cost products must be competitive with the features and qualities of the other products. They need to be good enough. Nobody wants to buy a terrible product even if it's cheap. So it needs to be comparable in features and quality, but not necessarily equal. The focus here is on efficiency so that costs are lower than your competitors' costs. Obviously, Amazon.com has done this famously with online stuff, and Walmart for years has been the textbook example of low-cost leadership. So what are the drivers of cost leadership strategy? First of all is economies of scale. In a separate video, I'll go into more detail on how economies of scale work, but just know that there are different production methods, usually starting out with a labor-intensive, people doing it by hand, as we see in this first curve. Then you buy some equipment that makes you more efficient but costs a lot of money, so you have to move out on the units sold to take advantage of that cost effectively. And then larger, more expensive machinery continues to move you down this curve. As your scale grows, you can take advantage of that. But you have this curve where economies of scales is improving. Then you're going to have constant returns to scale. And then at some point, you're getting so big that you can't continue along that line, and you'll start to get more expensive per unit as you try to crank out more and more units. And so this is called diseconomies of scale. Next up, you have learning. So learning is different than economies of scale, in that economies of scale focuses on the scale or size of the operation during a given period of time. So that can be a month, it can be a quarter, a year, but in some comparable amount of time, how many units are you producing? And as that goes up, you get more scale, and then you can get economies from that. Learning has to do with the cumulative level of production since the very first unit. So in this example, we're talking about bikes being put together by a bike shop. So the first bike takes 30 hours. The second bike takes 27 hours. Once you get to 4 bikes, it's only taking you 24.3 hours. The math whizzes will notice that this is a 10% improvement in the amount of time to build the bike. And that falls in the typical amount of 10 to 30% improvement every time you double the amount of total units produced. So once you have established what that is, it allows you to sort of estimate your future improvements that you'll make as you increase the cumulative learning from doing things again and again. Economies of scope. So an economy of scope is when you have 2 or more products that can share some resource, and you essentially are getting to an economy of scale across different products. So for instance, if you have 2 types of automobile that can share a lot of the same manufacturing machines, you're getting that return to scale through scope of having multiple overlapping products. This can lower your costs from this benefit. Production technology. So often a new entrant who wants to compete against incumbents that already have a lot of scale and experience advantages will try to compete with some new technology or new process that they have come up with. So for example, Nucor Steel utilizes these mini mill technologies. It allows them to produce steel more cheaply than the incumbents, but it's more limited in the maximum quality that they can make. So they can make lower end steel products cheaper than their rivals, but they can't make the highest quality steel products. So for instance, they can make rebar, but they can't make I-beams. So this has allowed them to compete effectively on the lower end of the market, even though they did not have the huge scale or experience of the incumbent steel firms. Product design. So sometimes you can change the product in such a way that it lowers your costs. So for example, Canon introduced smaller printers for individual use, what we're very used to today as sort of a personal printer or something that you would put in your office. But at the time, the norm was these very large Xerox printers for the entire office, the size of copy machines. And so by creating that smaller printer, they were able to bring down their production costs and compete with Xerox by sort of changing the overall design they were going for. And then finally, location. Some firms can try to attain lower production costs by locating their operations in cheaper markets. So historically, Pacific Cycle manufactured in China and Taiwan to achieve lower costs than Trek or Cannondale, who manufactured in the US. Now, since then, Trek and Cannondale have primarily moved their manufacturing to China as well, but not completely. They still make a small amount here in the US. So for instance, Trek makes 1% of their bicycles in the US, so that they can still claim that their bikes are made in the USA, because they are made in the USA, just not all of them. So what are some of the risks of the low-cost leadership strategy? First of all is a loss of cost advantage due to newer technologies. So as we just talked about with Nucor Steel, they came in with a new technology that allowed them to be cheaper than the incumbents. So if you were the low-cost leader in the steel industry, you suddenly had a problem because your current technology and setup of mills, which was different than Nucor Steel's, was no longer able to make the cheapest products in several of the product categories. So you essentially have lost that leadership and can only compete in the high end on lower price. Second is a failure to detect changes in customers' needs. Firms can get so caught up in trying to go cheaper and cheaper that they lose sight of what the customer wants, and you can end up making a cheaper product that nobody's buying because it's no longer fulfilling that good enough quality. And then finally, the ability for competitors to imitate the cost leadership strategy through some unique and different strategic actions. So, for instance, Amazon is able to compete with Walmart on low cost because of their all online strategy. They don't have all the brick and mortar things. So that can put Walmart at a disadvantage, who has historically been one of the top retailers for low cost, now has to compete with somebody who has a different price structure. Differentiation strategy. Firms using a differentiation strategy are going to provide products that have a different valued feature in the mind of customers that allows them to be sold at a premium price. Differentiation along as many dimensions as possible is the best strategy for firms trying to do this. So if they lose that differentiation along one dimension, they still have the other dimensions that they have set up in ways that their product is different or unique. The less similar to their competitors' products, the more buffered the firm is from competition with its rivals, because it's harder for a firm to compete with you if you have established that your product is somehow markedly different from their products. So key drivers from the differentiation strategy are going to be a premium brand image, customization, unique styling, speed, how fast is your car, how fast is your processor, is it more convenient to access, or having some unusually high quality. The purpose to these is to drive up the customer's willingness to pay for your product so that you can A, recoup the costs that were incurred creating this difference, even if it's just a perceived difference through marketing, and two, to generate enough extra money that all that work was worth it. So risks of a differentiation strategy. First is firms that can't sufficiently differentiate a product to create value for which customers will pay a premium price. So you might create a difference that the customers just don't care about and don't want to pay additional money for that difference. Or the difference is so small that customers don't really see the difference. Another issue is sort of the value proposition. So perhaps customers will decide to pay some for that product, but not enough to cover the costs that you need for creating that difference. And so they, again, are sort of unwilling to pay the premium that you need to not lose money on this differentiation strategy. And then finally, counterfeiters doing the cheap knockoff of differentiation, good or service, which can really change the value price differences. Depending on how good the knockoff is and how good or not good your difference has been established, customers may decide that the cheap knockoff is just as good and will not, again, pay your price any longer. So you may have been enjoying that premium price for a while, but now it's gone away because of the knockoff. So now we turn to focus strategies. So the difference with focus strategies is that they are going to focus on a specific customer or industry segment with the purpose of getting an advantage with that segment over serving the broader market. So some examples of those segments could be a particular buyer group, for instance, focusing on children or focusing on senior citizens. It could be a different segment of a product line, so looking at professional painters instead of do-it-yourselfers. Or it could be a different geographic market, so that you're focusing on, Louisiana versus the entire U.S. So the purpose of focusing on a specific market segment, be it customer industry, is for the firm to create additional value by focusing on that segment rather than the broader market, either through some cost savings they get by focusing on a smaller niche, or increased differentiation that they can offer because they're only focused on a specific customer. So for instance, if you are in a broad cruise ship product market, you could also focus in on specific niches. So you could offer additional differentiation by having a singles cruise, or a family Disney cruise, or a cruise that focuses on retirees. And because you're focused on that single customer segment, you can tailor the entire cruise to what those customers are going to like, rather than trying to make everyone happy and having a cruise that has some singles, some families, some seniors. So that would be a way that you could use the focus strategy to increase your differentiation. Now, to be successful, firms have to have the core competencies required to provide the difference of focusing on that segment. If it's not there, then it's possible that another firm could offer something very close to what you're offering and take away your advantage. And so the risks of the focus strategy are a competitor comes in and focuses even more narrowly than you and takes away your advantage and sort of squeezes you between their improved focus strategy and the broader market. Industry-wide competitors might decide to join you and create products that are focused on your specific market and take away sort of your advantage. And then lastly, that the difference between the needs of your specific market may shift and become closer to the rest of the industry, and therefore your cost savings or differentiation strategy sort of gets erased as the needs of those specific customers become more like the general needs of the industry. Finally, we have the integrated cost leadership differentiation strategy. You can think of this as the hybrid strategy. An excellent example of this is Target, that sits between Macy's, higher end store, and Walmart, the low cost leader. Now, this is a very difficult strategy to pull off. In the simulation, I see a lot of students that try to sort of split the difference and be somewhat differentiated and somewhat more expensive, or try to be the low-cost leader that also offers many features and is not fully focused on saving money, and therefore cannot fully cut their costs. And so you sort of have this in-between strategy. Now, you can be successful doing this, but it is very difficult. So firms using this strategy are going to provide either relatively low-cost products with some differentiated features over the cheapest products. So they're sort of moving up from the bottom. They're a little better for a little more money. Or they're going to produce almost as good differentiated products at lower costs compared to differentiated products. So they're sort of coming down from the top. They're sort of anchored on, you could buy a super high-end product, or you could save some money and get an almost as good product. The risk of this strategy is that it's very easy to get squished in the middle. If your firm doesn't have enough difference in cost savings or differentiation, customers won't choose you in the first place. And then the firms who are the cost leaders can start offering slightly better products, just like you, and then squeeze you out that way. Or the differentiators can create a lower cost version of their high-end product and squeeze you out that way. And so it's very easy to sort of get squeezed in the middle of the two extremes. So again, it is possible to be successful with a strategy, but it's very difficult.